Hello there and welcome to today's webinar on Young Trustees. My name is Tracy Bird and I run the SCVO Information Service and Trustee Network. Thanks to you all for joining us today, and just to note that this webinar is being recorded. So the makeup of your board is vital to good governance and to your organisation's effectiveness. If you've got a diverse board, then that will drive better decision making, and both your organisation and your leadership will be more inclusive and reflective of the community you serve. But I think we all recognise that trustee recruitment can be difficult, and unfortunately most organisations do still rely on word of mouth and existing networks to recruit for their boards. But this can result in people of colour, people with disabilities and young people being underrepresented on boards. So we do need to look at how to get increased diversity, because with a broader mix of skills and knowledge and experience, we can future-proof our governance. So what are the benefits of having young trustees on your board? How do you recruit for the future? Well, I'm delighted today that we have with us Elaine Crichton, who's going to tell you about the Get On Board initiative to get students onto boards in Scotland, and Mita Desai and Joel Mickelson. Joel is a young trustee himself, and he and Mita are going to talk about the young trustee movement, which aims to double the number of trustees aged 30 and under on boards by 2024. Joel will tell you about his own trustee experience and also address some common misconceptions about young trustees. And we've got Julie Hutchison here from Aberdeen Standard Capital, who are sponsors of SCVO's Trustee Network. And as a long-term advocate for young trustees, I wondered if you'd just like to say a few words, Julie, about what you think young trustees can bring to a board.
Thanks, Tracy, and evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us rather than being out in the sunshine on this lovely evening. Well, if I reflect back to when I was first on a board, I was in my early 30s, which by some measures might be considered young, but not perhaps as young as really we want to be looking at in the context of this evening's discussion. We certainly found that it's about avoiding groupthink. You know, if everyone thinks the same way, if you have too much similarity and consensus around the board table, that's not a good thing. So measures to avoid groupthink is really what this is about in some ways. Also to signpost that we've seen a huge appetite in Aberdeen Standard for support for young trustees and those looking for their first role. So we have a webinar series called Next Gen now, which looks at all of these kinds of issues. And if anyone would like to watch again, we've got recordings of the webinars that we've had. In fact, I had one this morning, so this is a double webinar day for me, and just really supportive of initiatives to bring more voices to the board table and address that point that the average age of a trustee at 62 or so is not necessarily where we would want that to remain. So back to you, Tracy.
Thanks, Julie. We've got a lot to get through today, but before I hand over to Joel, I'm just going to ask you to complete a quick poll to see where you're at right now. So what I want to know is how diverse is your board, and that's both in terms of protected characteristics such as race and gender, sexual orientation, but also if you think about it in terms of diversity of thought and experience. So up to now, most people are in the middle. This is always quite interesting. Nobody's admitting to being a really inclusive organisation with a really diverse board, because maybe they wouldn't be here if they were like that. So that's great. 85% of you are saying you're a work in progress. You know, there's some groups are underrepresented on the board, but you're taking steps to address this. And that's great. And that's what this webinar today is all about. Thank you for completing that. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Joel, and he's going to tell you a little bit about being a young trustee. And if you do have any questions, do use the Q&A facility as we go. And also, if you've got any of your own hints and tips, do put them in the chat. Over to you now, Joel. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. Good evening, everyone. Yes, reiterating our thanks that you're in with us and not out in the sun, which I will be out as the minute this finishes for my tan/burn. So I'm looking forward to that. But hopefully, yes, I should be able to share some of the insights, hopefully, that I have as having been on a board, having been a young trustee, and also in the journey, and then equipping maybe some of you with the tools and kind of ideas to better go about how to do that, because it's maybe not an easy path. You need to do a lot of convincing of other people, and there's a lot of learning that needs to take place. And when I kind of reflect on my own journey, if I'm honest, I mean, when we talk about young trustees, we're talking about under 30. And when I was appointed to the board of the Scottish Child Law Centre, I was under 21. So that's obviously even less than the 3% of overall trustee picture that we're looking at for under 30. But I had a huge level of knowledge about human rights, children's rights. I'd advocated internationally even by that point. So it was actually, when I came to the table, it was completely, maybe demanded to be taken seriously rather than had to be asked for it. And it's just having had that privilege that I, advocate for then other young people to get the opportunity to sit at the table and to get that really beneficial and unique opportunity of being a young trustee. So I'm Joel, as was introduced, and Elaine is gonna pick up later on some of the points that we're going to cover. But as opposed to just rambling on, we've actually built our presentation to your needs. So in anticipation of this, we got some questions, and me and Elaine spoke about the questions that are often asked and the challenges that people often have. And these were the overall questions and things that we thought would be helpful to address. So I'm going to take the first of convincing your existing board members why you need young trustees, and then providing some insight of what it can be like to then come along as a young trustee and have to fulfill those maybe ideas and somewhat unrealistic ideas that people put forward of being a young trustee. And then Elaine, with her experience and expertise on having supported that and facilitated young trustees getting on boards, is going to take about the recruitment and then onboarding of young trustees. So without further ado, let's get started. This presentation today by me, as Tracy introduced, has been supported by the Young Trustee movement. I am glad to be able to advocate for it and put forward, its really great aims of trying to double the number of trustees on charity boards and try to drive down, as we're hearing, that average age, which is far higher than I think we could see as diversity at present at all. 92% of trustees are white, older, above average income and average education. So that's really not, I think, where we want it to be. And the Young Trustee movement does a fantastic job. And if I could just move all of your faces out of the road, then the three points at the bottom here are the most important about the support that the Young Trustee movement provides. So the first one there is about a network to help young trustees talk to other young people in that situation. Sometimes that can just be really helpful. The digital hub that they run, and ambassadors, which help them in kind of getting to other parts of Scotland, which actually, as of we were hearing today, there have been some really exciting developments on, and the Young Trustee movement kind of watch this space is going to be coming to Scotland. And I know Maita's on this call and she might be able to share some insights later on if you're interested. And, definitely that's something that's been moving. So watch this space. Where are we now then? Well, you've obviously all took the first step of coming along today to improve the situation that we have on boards and champion young people, but it's good to just take stock. So as I said, 92% are white and men, and I think 1 in 12 trustees being called John and Dave gives us an idea of that. Of course, it's slightly flippant, but I think it is helpful and insight. And that 3% that I was citing earlier of trustees are under 30. So considering my own journey of arriving here before I was 21, must be something about 1% really, it didn't feel that bad at all. Maybe I was just on a supportive board, but I had a really positive journey. So if we can just kind of drive that number up and support other young people to get onto boards, then I think that would be really helpful. And I think when we consider this point in the middle about having less vacancies than there are aspiring trustees, then that is where we can take kind of meaningful stock and actually think, well, how are we going to sort that? And one strand of that is creating more vacancies. So boards deciding we need to improve our diversity, we need to have young people represented. And the second is to kind of drive down so much of that informal recruitment that takes place somewhat naturally because of the kind of historical creation of the people that are around an organization, sometimes being brought in to help support that organization, but kind of drive that down because, you know, 71% of trustees are recruited through that informal process. So 71, a really big number there. Is this something to work? So turning to a Scottish specific statistics, then I just wanted to draw on my kind of expertise, which I advocate for young people to be participants in lots and lots of different spaces in civil society. You know, a young trustee is just one. And I kind of use the tools of human rights. I discuss with sector leaders, I discuss with the government about how we're going to do that. And I think it's just helpful when we're considering Scotland and all of you here wanting to advocate for young people to participate, that we take stock of just that landscape that we're kind of asking young people to join. So the first there, the youth employment rate in Scotland, so this 16 to 24 is almost that, there's 5 years difference, but you know, under 30 is the age that we're talking about for young trustees, and the employment rate is about 60%. So there's 40% there, and this is a climbed statistic, so that's high, who aren't employed. And you know, the big argument that we hear against or why that might be as an insight is that they're at university. So I think that when I consider my board, if I was to have someone fill my position on a board as a young trustee, I think it would be a push for them to have a young person who wasn't at university and wasn't employed. I think that would be a push. I think I would need to do a lot of work as to advocate the benefits, as to advocate the need and the support that they would need to have that. But when we think about the overall picture, that's almost half of young people, and they need to be represented. And when I think about the Scottish Child Law Centre, you know, we provide legal advice to on children's law, to families, to young people themselves. I can advocate that, you know, all of the people who phone on that second statistic on the left are someone who has a professional qualification. You know, I can't even advocate that a third of people who phone are someone who has a postgraduate qualification. And yet when we see the representation on boards, we see this kind of really strong basis of professional university education. And I understand why that exists. And, you know, there's a kind of weight as to building strategy and writing strategy that needs to be there. But I think when we're considering, as we'll go on to, and, you know, avoiding groupthink and in avoiding people are having the ability to design better systems and, you know, provide and fulfill those needs of people who are actually using a charity service, then we do need to consider the room for improvement. And I think employment and university graduates is just one strand of that, but one which I often think is quite helpful to imagine the boardrooms that young people will be coming to join, like this one. So if this was your boardroom, if you maybe you'd arrived early, you'd half an hour to plan what you were going to advocate for young trustees, you were thinking, okay, I've got this, we're going to convince them today. How are you going to do that? Well, here are your key arguments. That's what I'm going to equip you with. Having done it, having told other people to do it, and through loads of conversations, here are my kind of 3 arguments. And what you can do is think about your organization, think about the people on your board, and then choose maybe the most or the couple most relevant to you. So this is them. One. So I'm gonna just quickly kind of outline them, give them a bit more flesh as to help you kind of understand them. And then I do have some further notes on them. So definitely click through some of the links. There's some links to some other data and some of the kind of documents that I'm going to talk about. But I didn't want to give you all of that this evening, not least when it's gorgeous outside, because I thought I might be deaf by PowerPoint. So I'll just kind of slightly briefly run you through the three of those. So the first is what I was able to use because of the nature of my board. And also, if this is relevant, and if you're a human rights based organization, if your organization has in its kind of strategic aims human rights, it's a doddle, if I can say that, because there is such a real duty and such a real relevance for your organization to engage young people, because a human rights based approach basically means that you're acting to better advocate for the human rights of children and young people. And what that means is that you don't actually particularly need organizational benefit. It's that it's an end in of itself. So that actually you don't, when people are saying, oh, but is this going to benefit us? Is this going to, impact us? If it's going to take all this work, is the benefits going to really be worth it? Actually isn't the question. It's if you're an organization committed to human rights, then this is something you need to do. So get with the program slightly. And human rights, not all organizations have the luxury of this. I worked at UNICEF, and my organization has, huge attachment to children's rights principles. But in thinking more broadly, loads of organizations work with SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm very sure that everyone's aware of them. SCVO does loads of work on, making them understandable, making them relevant to organizations. And that also diversifies human rights into all of these things about regeneration, gender discrimination, about children, poverty, and those are all underpinned by human rights. So if that's relevant to if your organization's human rights or SDG, one is your argument of choice. Two is where we're getting to think about groupthink. So improving data analysis. So basically data analysis happens by the people in the room. So if there's different people in the room, you're going to analyze the data differently. Really, it's not that complicated. And it's particularly important if you're the service, the information, the support that your organization provides is used by young people. That's where that's a really crucial one. Because if you don't have young people feeding into that analysis, that strategy, that decision making, then you're not going to be able to design that and react to the environment as well as you could with young people. And this is a helpful one for organizations which is almost all organizations, but particularly when it's wrote into strategy about creating progress, about being really tailored to the environment, about reacting to their community, like we were hearing earlier. That's a great argument. And I've put some links to some helpful things about groupthink. The Young Trustee movement does some great stuff on this on their website. They have some really great resources, and when the slides are shared, I've linked to them as well. And argument three, or point three, when you're sitting in that boardroom that we're seeing, is the most unique one, I would say, to which I would use and I would recommend other people to use on the basis of my position, because I spend every waking minute of every day thinking about children's rights and children's human rights in Scotland. So I feel really, really comfortable and passionate about the change that it can bring. So it will be probably of no surprise that in the last month, I think, maybe just a couple of weeks ago, we passed the Uncrc into Scottish legislation, which is hugely exciting, for a devolved nation. It's really advanced, and maybe too advanced, some might argue. And that has become a huge topic of policy and governance, and a huge amount of funding actually is going to be put into that position and getting organizations and public bodies to be compliant to that. And, you know, over the past 5 years, we've seen a huge drive in government focus on policy, and government focus on mechanisms and, you know, engagement that they're doing on bills, being much more focused on young people's voices and children's voices. And the Young Trustee movement is something which, when it comes to Scotland in its latest development, is, I think, probably going to find in some sense it's pushing an open door at a national picture, because there's such high level and kind of forefront support for that. So, and another crucial point of this is that all of that policy and funding has cross-party support, you know. So in terms of policymakers, then it has a really, really cross-party strong basis of support behind it. So this point here is really helpful, I think, when we think about that set of trustees who we have on boards, who are quite often, you know, older. They might be have more strategic positions in organizations, and they react really well to thinking about organizational positioning. They react really well to thinking about strategic positioning of their organization. And I think that the UNC is a really exciting thing. It's just happened. And if you're an organization who wants to be forward thinking and seen as being on the right side of progressing young people's voices, then Kelsey praise, get a young trustee. And once you've convinced them, that's fab. And then Elaine might be able to support some of your challenges and provide some insight on recruiting and then onboarding the young trustees that you've convinced your board to take on.
Joel, can I just interject there? Somebody's asking, what is the Uncrc? Could you give us a brief outline of what it is?
I can indeed. Apologies for not picking up on that myself. Zoom is ever the mystery. The Uncrc is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. So it's an international piece of UN treaty law. It is the most ratified. So the most countries in the world have signed up to it, more than anything. So more than nuclear disarmament treaties, more than health rights treaties. So it's, you know, it's 192 territories. And why, you may ask, is 192 when we only have 180 something countries at the UN? Is because there's territories who aren't countries who have even signed up to it. That's how popular it is. And it's a really helpful, expansive list of just rights and positions, the right to a name, the right to have your voice heard. And, you know, it's been passed into Scottish legislation. So that's a really great and signalling advance, which if you have a young trustee, you can completely join in with your organisation on that.
Thanks, Joel.
And with having convinced with your 3 arguments, then it's Elaine who can provide insight on, she can, on recruiting and onboarding those trustees. So Elaine, please take it away. Oh, we're doing a second poll and then Elaine, I think.
Yeah, I'm just going to do a quick poll before we go to Elaine. And that is really just to what you think are the biggest barriers to getting young trustees on your board. And they can range from you can't provide enough support and training, what Joel's covered, attitude of existing board members. You're not sure where to recruit them, or there may be legal issues if you think, particularly for trustees aged under 18, or you're not sure how to convince young people that being a trustee is for them. So just wondering where you're at with that one. So I think the most popular answer is actually convincing the young people that being a trustee is for them. So I think maybe Mita can come in on that after Elaine's done her presentation. But yeah, that's quite a really interesting mix of answers. Thanks for doing that. Okay, Elaine, over to you. Thank you. And you're on mute, Elaine, just thanks.
I can't believe after, how long is it? Over a year of using Zoom, we still get these things wrong. Anyway, and I had all these things set up. Woo! I didn't know I'd done that. Right, okay. So much for the trial run. Anyway, so I do not have all the answers. I'm going to say to you right out of the box about recruiting trustees and how you get hold of young people. I gather my knowledge from being part of this initiative, the Charity Board initiative that has been set up for the last 4 or 5 years, and then just interacting with the over 500 charities that Inspiring Scotland supports, and I'm a member of the staff team at Inspiring Scotland, and I also am very involved in board training and supporting trustees and finding roles for trustees as well. So don't have all the answers, but wanted to tell you about the Charity Board initiative this evening. We've got slightly different statistics from Joel, but it still points to the fact that there aren't enough young people this time under 35 involved in trusteeship at all. So, and here I've listed the various reasons why that might be so. It could be that young people actually think that that you actually do have to be 62 and retired and called John or Dave to be a trustee, and it's definitely not something that a young person can do. They may think as well that they don't have the right skills or experiences. They're unaware of the value that they can bring to a boardroom or a committee meeting. It is definitely difficult to find out about charity vacancies. I think that is true. There's 25,000 plus charities in Scotland, and it is really difficult. Most of those I would think would have a vacancy, but it's really difficult to find out about those vacancies. Some even don't put their vacancies on their own websites. That makes it doubly hard. And charities do find it difficult to find and support young people. And I think that's a little bit to do with making it sound attractive and interesting and something that young people would like to be involved in. And the very terminology around boards and trustees, it's all very alien, and if I might even suggest a bit fuddy-duddy as well. So not the happy hunting ground for young people. So we launched the Charity Board initiative. It started from basically a good idea at a charity lunch with Santander and RSM, and just around the difficulty of getting young trustees interested in being trustees and how to recruit them. So what was decided at that lunch, that one of the best routes was maybe to demystify trusteeship for young people. And we approached a pilot of charities and discussed our ideas with them, and they were very positive about the approach. We were also very lucky to have not only Santander and RSM in this steering group, but we also had Edinburgh Napier University involved, who were very keen to get involved in this a further charity initiative, because they were already running a pilot scheme at Edinburgh Napier to recruit young trustees. So we had our in, if you like, to young people through that connection with Edinburgh Napier. And that wasn't just undergraduates, also postgraduates as well. So it could be looked as being a little bit, not inclusive. It doesn't include all young people, but we had to start somewhere. This steering group, we're all volunteers, and we run all of this in our spare time. So, and we just wanted to, with all things, when it starts off as a pilot, you want to keep them kind of close to home and on a small scale. So 4.5 years later, that's still where we are. I got involved as well, providing a little bit of a bridge to other charities. RSM did that as well, and then Anderson Strathern got involved as well with training and support, because that's very important to give young people the tools that they need, and part of this demystifying process as well. So we launched an initiative which was copied from the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. So we have the Charity Board Initiative puts undergraduates and postgraduates who are interested in this Charity Board Initiative through a bronze, silver, gold scheme, if you like. And there's different, if you almost in the charity terminology, KPIs that have to be met at each stage. And those are checked in logbooks that are collated and looked at by the steering group. So they have to complete each of these, the bronze stage, for instance, before they move to the silver stage and then on to the gold stage. So there's an awful lot of time and effort is put in by the steering group and anyone who volunteers to help them as well in making sure that the students can progress through this bronze, silver, gold training programme, and also picking up relevant experience as you'll see as I go on explaining this. This doesn't count to their degrees, by the way. This is something that they're doing in their spare time because they're truly wanting to find out about trusteeships and the opportunities that might exist. So at the bronze stage, there's a personal meeting with anyone that's come onto the Charity Board Initiative. So we find out a little bit about them, a little bit about their skills, their interests, what makes them tick, what they would be interested in. And then there's also a requirement to complete induction training. So they get an introduction to charity finance, which is from RSM. Charity law module as well, provided by Anderson Strathern. And I do a little bit that I call emotional intelligence. So I just talk about how, you know, what it actually means to be on a board, what it feels like, what you know, skills you need, how you interact with other people, you know, being part of a team, but questioning, constructive challenge, all of that. I tell them little stories to make it less scary as well, from various of my board roles. So once they've accumulated all that knowledge, they're actually board ready. And I would actually suggest that probably have a little bit more knowledge about what makes a charity tick and how it all works than maybe some existing trustees. So they get a certificate to say that they have completed that stage, and we term that as them then being board ready. The next stage is that we then knock on the door of charities that we know, that we work with, and say to them, hey, we have this young person who would really like to come and shadow your organisation, come into your board meetings, come into your project meetings, any sort of senior meeting that happens in your organisation. It could be a fundraising meeting, it could be talking about a new project, it could in fact be a board meeting. I suspect it wouldn't be an audit meeting because that might be a little bit boring and could potentially put people off. But anyway, the charity gives the young person an opportunity to shadow that type of meeting, and they have to complete over 14 hours of that. And that just gives them a real good look at behind the scenes, how a charity actually works. So after they've done that, they complete their silver workbook and the evidence, other skills that they've developed. Again, they meet with us and they report back on the knowledge that they have gained. We also get feedback from the host charity as well, which is really important. The final stage is that we set objectives for them over the next 3 to 6 months. They may become a member of a subcommittee or a board or of a charity. That actually does happen, or they get involved in a project. That happens a lot. We also get, again, 360 feedback from any subcommittee that they've been involved with or the board. And then we look at what other relevant training that they have done themselves. And at the end of all of that, they get their gold certificate, which gives them the confidence, I think, that they could easily move on to a board in Scotland. But as you can imagine, student population is quite transient. So the real wish of all of us on the steering group was that as they migrate through their lives through the world, they will not be put off from, going on a local parent-teacher board or getting involved with a local charity or international charities, because it's not a scary subject. They know what it involves and they've seen it working in practice. And I think that is really, really beneficial to the, to the younger people. These are the charities that are involved at the moment. We're always looking for more host charities. At the moment, we've got 4 or 5 young people who are looking for host charities. It doesn't involve an awful lot of work on the part of the host charity, because I said the young people arrive board ready, but there is a little bit of work involved in making sure that they get the relevant papers and maybe suggesting the meetings that they might want to come to. And we find when it works well, or when it works really well, that there's a nominated person in the charity who is kind of like their buddy and kind of works with them, and where the young person can maybe ask some of the questions that they might be embarrassed to ask in front of a larger audience. Although the first rule of trusteeship, and I'm sure Julie will agree with me, is that there's no such thing as the daft question. In fact, the dafter, the better, actually. So that was just a little bit of an insight to what the Charity Board Initiative is all about. It has won an educational award, so in the educational sphere, it has definitely got merit. I know Miles Weaver is on the call tonight and he'll be able to attest to that. And the award was about anticipating the positive difference to communities students will make from developing their leadership and decision-making skills on the programme. So it's a bit of a long way of describing that it's been very impactful for the young people and their future leadership skills, and also impactful for the communities that they've got involved in through working in the charities. So that is me, end of slides. I did want to say that that was just one way, that it was an easy way for us to engage with young people through the universities. So it's not just Edinburgh, Napier that we're involved with, it's all the universities in the Central Belt. And it's been a very, very successful programme. We would love to widen it out to young people, but a little bit like yourselves. How do you find them? How do you contact them? So one way obviously is through social media. For instance, if you had a board vacancy, an arts group way up in Caithness relatively recently had a board vacancy, and they found that the most responses came from social media. So Instagram, Facebook, and they were actually quite surprised, and they had 12 people applying for, they ended up taking 3. They didn't really have 3 vacancies, but they were really surprised at, you know, the breadth of skills that was on offer and people that were wanting to join the board. So I think social media is a very powerful tool. You can also pay for advertising as well on Good Moves, etc. But I wouldn't discount social media. Another way to get, because there was a comment earlier about it's not so much getting the voice of young people on board, but I would broaden out to get, you know, the lived experience, so the service users of your organisation on your board. And sometimes there's a bit of a reluctance because, you know, it's viewed as being stuffy, or you don't want to go because it's, you know, full of people making important decisions. But one of the things that you can do is you can have a kind of like a little subgroup of users, and you maybe nominate one of those users to come to the board and just give a verbal, it has to be verbal rather than written, just a little bit of the insights of how they're finding the services of the charity. So they just give their report, little verbal report, 10, 15 minutes to the board, and then off they go again. But that means that lived experience voice is coming directly to the board. And there's one board that I'm on that does that, and it's the highlight actually. And it really lets us know exactly, you know, how well the charity is providing services to the people that actually want the services and are using them. And it's also a great source of stories as well, because there's some, yeah, it's just a really good way of finding out exactly what's happening on the ground from someone who's experiencing the services of the charity. So I think that's a good way to potentially get people involved, young people, or just generally service end users. So I will stop there. Yeah, that's plenty of time on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. We've already got somebody interested in that they put in the chat. So what we'll do when we send out the information tomorrow, there'll be Elaine's contact details. So the charities that are interested in the initiative can get in touch. I'm just thinking myself about, you know, supporting young trustees once you do have them on a board, and obviously an induction is really important, and perhaps getting a mentor for them. And I just wanted to bring Mita in there just to say what you recommend, you know, once you've got a young trustee on a board, how how can the Young Trustees movement, how can people on the boards themselves help? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and one that is really relevant too, because there was some research around young trustees, and they found that the reason why people might leave, particularly those from more marginalised backgrounds, is not feeling like they belong in the board and not feeling part of the board. So if you do all that hard work to get them on the board and then they leave, that's obviously not great. So what can you do? It's all a journey. So I think before launching into recruiting a young trustee, fully understanding the reason of why you are having diversity on boards and identifying what is the culture like on the board, and is it a place where young trustees can thrive, is the real start of the journey to enable them to then stay. And then, as Tracy said, identifying where training is needed. And actually what we found is that a huge proportion of people who are like really raving about the benefits of young trustees, often young trustees have been there for 2 meetings, they've maybe said like 3 words, and people are saying, oh my goodness, like now since young trustees have joined, like we have training, I feel more comfortable saying, hey, I have no idea what's going on here, can somebody explain this to me? And the whole culture of the board has transformed and been changed because they've realized in the process of creating inclusive induction processes for young trustees, it makes the whole board more effective. So there is a huge part of this where it's just like, how can we innovate governance by asking that question of how can we induct young people in the correct way? And we have another free training which I'm sure Tracy can send around to talk you through the steps, because of course this is going to be different for the size of your organization and where you're working with as well. I can also just build on a few points if that's okay, Tracy, or I can,
Yeah.
or if you wanted to jump on.
Go ahead.
Great, yeah, and I just wanted to separate in terms of how do we find the young trustees. That was a great question, and as Joel mentioned, there's a huge gap here between the demand of young people who want to be on boards and the supply of vacancies. So if you're a board looking for young trustees, you are going to be spoilt for choice. So the space is, how do we find them? Somebody on the chat actually put, you know, if you signpost to organisations like ours or Young Scot, Youth Scotland, there are already organisations who have developed these amazing links with young people, and just connecting up your organization and signposting through those spaces that already exist is going to be doing all the hard work for you. Also, we have free advertising for you. If, as Elaine said, if you tag us on social media, we will share it through our networks. And of course, there's Elaine's amazing program as well to take advantage of. Then there's the actual interview process as well. So once you've attracted more young people to your space, how are you actually getting them from the application stage to in the room? Somebody also put in the chat, one of the biggest barriers that I found is that people have prioritized experience over skills and energies, and I cannot agree with that enough. There's been so many young trustees where we've had feedback where they've actually had feedback to say, you know, the feedback I had was that I had the most unique perspectives and ideas to bring to the board, but I didn't have enough experience. And when we look at that back to the people who are on the recruiting side of the panel, often what we hear is people have prioritized contacts and experience over that diversity of perspectives. And when we think about what is the role of a trustee board, it's not for contacts and it's not to do the operational stuff in the boardroom. It's actually having that space where the buck stops with you, you're accountable to your community. And so by being rooted in that understanding of why diversity of perspectives is so powerful, it also supports your interview stage to be more robust.
Great, thanks, Mita. I also wondered whether anybody of you on the panel have got any thoughts on, you know, how do we sell trusteeship to young people? Obviously, it's personal and professional development that would be, so it's not, you know, the organization's getting everything, the young person is getting something back. Julie, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, it's something that I've heard said before, is that it's a chance for early decision-making opportunities. You know, perhaps in your job, you're maybe in the early stages of your working life, you're not yet in a senior role, you can't necessarily influence the strategy of the organization that you're with. But when you're around the board table of a charity, those opportunities are open to you. So actually, it gives you that earlier ability to influence compared to the day job. And I think that the way that then you bring those skills back to your day job, it can then enable you to bring another perspective into that part of your life. So the two things feed off each other in a really positive way.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add that definitely leadership, and then an increased understanding of other people's perspectives. But what we find when we're interviewing all these young people is that they're passionate about various causes, and why they want to get involved in boards is because they want to make a difference to, you know, the area that charity or organization is working in. And that's unlike some people that I find, going back to Joel's 62, you know, called John or Dave, they've got a lot to give as well, a lot to offer, a lot of experience, but they're at the giving back. And I think it's actually really quite interesting that maybe the older, including myself, are the giving back, but the young people, almost to a young person, are wanting to make change, are wanting to amplify the voice, and it's all about the cause and it's about the passion.
Yeah. And also I'd say to my 3 children as well, you know, if you've got anything on your CV that marks you out as different, as a talking point at interviews. So whether you volunteer, whether you're on a board, you know, that gives you something that marks you out when you do go for jobs as a young person.
Also, we found that the questions that, you know, the board might be having of why not young trustees are the same questions young people might be having as well. So when young people are also aligned with those same questions about why they can bring so much value onto the board and why they are so needed, we've found that massively increases applications.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions. There's one about attracting young people to paid trustee board positions as opposed to voluntary. Certainly what I do, and in my experience, they would be unpaid board positions, but I don't know if anybody's got any comments on that. Julie?
Yeah, I suppose there's another hat I wear on a public board, and it's not a charity role as such, but some of the responsibilities can sound similar in terms of the way you talk about that. And public board roles do have an element of fee that goes with them. And it's certainly true that appointing for Scotland, Scottish Public Appointments, look at diversity and inclusion and seeking to represent Scotland's communities on public boards. And so it's another pathway for consideration when individuals are thinking about, you know, what would be a really interesting opportunity for me to be involved in an organisation. Is that organisation a charity? Is it a public body? So, you know, a number of routes are open.
Yeah, thank you. And also, how do you avoid being tokenistic, having the young person on the... Sorry, Elaine, I came in there, didn't see you. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just say that the application process for all boards differs. So an application process for a publicly appointed role is, just by the nature of the role held, going to be more involved, and there's going to be different stages. There would potentially be an interview panel. You might even have to meet with a minister. Whereas charity boards, it can go from really informal to meeting the CEO and the chair to maybe filling up an application form and then getting into a situation where you're interviewing the charity and the charity's interviewing you. But it was a huge overgeneralization to say that charity is possibly less formal and public appointments a little bit more formal. But obviously, I mean, you get some huge charities, so they would have a very formal process as well.
Yeah. Thanks. There's an interesting comment in the chat there from Gillian, just reverse mentoring. I haven't heard that term myself, but with younger trustees and service users being able to share their perspectives and life experiences, and that has a positive effect for all. And certainly Anne, in the question and answer, she said that as well, you know, that lived experience, young people's views, it can change the whole strategic direction of an organisation. We've got another question in, I don't know whether it's a question or a comment, at AVA, which is the third sector interface for Aberdeenshire, and they're very interested in promoting young trusteeship because they're seeing an interest from youngsters. And also, yes, the age-old need for fresh blood on the boards of many non-profits, which we're aware of. We've got about maybe 5 minutes to go, so do get your questions up if you want to ask any of our panelists while we've got them. The other thing I was going to ask is just how do you avoid being tokenistic with young people, you know, and also don't give the young people, well, they're going to do all the digital stuff for us and that kind of thing. Anybody got any comments on that?
I think that one I would definitely say is about whether they do the digital stuff and just keep the peace is a different matter, but contribute to the strategic discussion, and maybe not long after. So maybe that's maybe complicated if you've had a 3-year plan, but maybe in thinking about the implementation of that, definitely take stock of a kind of a high level discussion with your young trustees, or frankly, it's best practice with any new board member, whether that's a service user or a young person, about implementing that and about the kind of wide ways that you can implement that with insight from them. And think that when you're doing that, you know, it's quite understood that particularly social work come to mind, but when they are in the room with service users or clients, then their whole approach is different. So it's far more than just a kind of surface level how they're going to approach the issue. It's fundamentally a different conversation because there's different people in it, and you would just take a totally different approach to making decisions about the service and the benefits of it when there's someone who's actually benefited from it in the room. So definitely maybe do a kind of retake when you have new board members, I'd say.
Okay. And then there's the old adage of yeah, you should probably be, when you're looking for new trustees, you should probably do a board skills audit or send out a board skills questionnaire. And the better ones have not just got the hard skills, so whether you're a lawyer or an HR or a social media person or whatever, but some of the softer skills as well. And then you can really hone in on the gaps that you're needing to fill, and then search accordingly. So if you're looking for a lawyer, there's lots, you know, the Law Society might be somewhere. If you're looking for a young person with particular experience, I think Kirsty put lots of suggestions in the chat earlier. So, but it's good to instead of just, oh, I think we could do, well, everyone's having to do everything digitally now, so we need a young person to, well, no, not necessarily. And is that really a gap? You might have a bigger gap somewhere else on your board.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. I think we've probably got time just for one more question, and it's two people have sort of like asked around this, so it's probably quite a difficult one. And I'm just wondering, do the panel think, is there the kinds of organisations that young trustees are just not appropriate for? The question is, charity supports people with MND, and the average age of diagnosis of beneficiaries is 66. So how can we make the charity sufficiently attractive to young trustees when we've got very few young beneficiaries? And there was a question, another organisation, it was a membership organisation, membership was over 60. So what's the relevance really of having a young trustee on board for them? Anybody can sell that one?
Yeah, I don't mind just taking that. And I think it's helpful to split that into two parts. First of all, when we're looking at beneficiaries, and also it helps us to think about tokenism as well, is how do your beneficiaries input into the board? And the collective opinions, obviously one person or two people cannot possibly represent all of your beneficiaries to say, yes, we all think X on Y. And therefore there needs to be mass surveys, there needs to be the consultations, the listening stuff, all of that needs to happen. What that is different to is having the diversity of perspectives in the room, to be able to ask specific questions. So it might say, have we had a consultation on X? Or their lived experiences help them think, well, have we thought about diversifying our income on Y? So it's more like understanding why both of those things are important and how they're different as well. is really important, and making sure that the person who's coming in who has lived experience of potentially the charity that you're working with also understands that is really helpful, so that they are participating as a full trustee. And then the other part of, well, if our beneficiaries are not young, like how does that relate to our organization? And I think it's helpful to think about it as the reason why we say the term young trustees is because there is a lack of people who are young on boards. And really this is about intergenerational perspectives. If there was less than 3% of people on boards who were over the age of 60, I think I'd be saying, oh my goodness, this is a huge problem. Like, older people are a huge part of our society. They have loads of experience to bring to our boards. They can say, we've been there, we've done that, have you considered X, Y, Z? Those perspectives are really important. So it's that diversity of perspectives and different ways of thinking that helps you navigate risk, which is why it's so important. And then in terms of making it attractive, there is always people who will be connected to your cause and your mission because they're part of your community. So for instance, Age UK, for instance, has loads of young people who are interested, because we all have older people we care about. We are going to be older at one point, hopefully everyone will be in their lives. So these issues are, and there are a huge donor base as well. So I'll stop talking there now, Tracy, and let other people answer that question.
Anyone else got anything to add?
I was just going to type it, but I guess in 2 minutes I can say it, that discussion going on in the chat about young trustees being the children and grandchildren of those affected and as part of that community, like Maita was saying, is exactly what I was going to put down. And I actually had this discussion with someone from the public body responsible for pensions and public pensions at a forum for, and it was like the CEO or something, or the managing director, and they were just adamant that it wasn't relevant. And after about 5 minutes of I didn't actually use any of my 3 arguments today. Maybe I did, can't remember, but I argued that there's totally a relevance, because while young people obviously are not pension age and going to be getting paid for it, not having any information which is relevant or understandable to young people is ridiculous, because there are so many examples in which you know, really tragically, young people might need to engage with receiving pensions, or, you know, are being prepared to just snap into action of equipping young people with money discussions. You know, we're putting forward all of these life skills through the curriculum for excellence, and there was an example of a public body not think it was relevant. And suffice it to say, after lunch, she was on board. So maybe that is one way of thinking about it too.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up now. Thank you for all your questions and contributions. I hope you found this useful. We will have a recording of this webinar on our website tomorrow, and as I said, we'll send out an email to all attendees with resources, the slides, and if you've got any further questions, either get back in touch with myself or any of our panelists if it's something specific to them. But thanks again, and hopefully we should see you later on in the year. We're taking a little break for the good governance webinars over summer, but we should be starting up September, October time. So thanks again.